Hey guys, welcome to the Dancer's Book. My name is Alexander Bonev. In today's video, I'm going to talk about turns and rotations and the way they are both related. Enjoy the video. There are a couple of important elements that we'll try to cover in this video. It's very important for us to understand that in order for a turn to be completed correct way, we need to have a proper understanding of rotation, amount of rotation, and how do we use it in general. So the first thing we're going to discuss is actually our head position and eye level in dancing. So although this video is specifically designed for rhythm and Latin, you can definitely incorporate that in your American Smooth and Standard if any sort of rotations needed. So the first thing we're going to talk once again is actually our eye level. So quite often when a dancer, especially beginners, are trying to learn how to turn, there's a lot of overthinking happening. Because of that, the eyes are quite often down. So often what they will hear from their teachers is head up, head up, head up, head up, and quite frankly that may not always be the case, meaning their head may not be down, but the eyes as itself, they may be down. Now, with that being said, the only thing that you need to do is really just trying to look at, for example, your teacher. If you're having, let's just say, any kind of movement that is related to the teacher. Now, if you're to be turning, if you're to have sort of rotation involved, then you definitely have to learn how to spot. And in order for you to spot properly, you'll obviously be using your eyes. Now, your head as itself, there's a common misunderstanding of the head being pulled back, and the reason for that is because when we say the head that it needs to be up, we don't particularly do this. All that we need to do is we essentially need to make sure the shoulders are pushed down, and essentially the head and neck are essentially aligned with the spine in a proper way. However, again, the most common thing that is usually happening is we just tend to trying to bring the head up, obviously. Disconnect our neck and spine, or essentially push the neck on the top of the spine, which is of course incorrect. So with that being said, if you're trying to rotate, let's just say you arrive on the foot and you're trying to turn, but you're being told, oh, like head up. Well, that's frankly most likely because your eyes were looking down. You see, like this particular case, all that you need to do is you need to adjust the eye level of yours, and then obviously problem will be solved. So the first thing that you need to make sure that it's proper, that's your eye level. The second thing is obviously your head needs to be properly aligned with the spine without any sort of tilt back, forward, or so forth. And then obviously we have the third point, which is of course our neck. So when we're dancing, unless shape being involved, then we should probably not tilt the neck left, right, and obviously forward, backwards. Now, a great thing for you to practice is essentially the way that you will be interacting with your eyes and your head. If you have a mirror, that's obviously the ideal version. However, if you don't do so, then it's just make sure that every now and then you either record yourself or you have someone who would give you a feedback, your teacher or a family member and so forth. So when I'm spotting, when I'm trying to essentially turn properly, I always try to know where I'm going. So for example, it's easy to, let's just say, find 2 or 3 spots in the room and obviously just alter spotting into those spots when rotating. Every turn has a proper amount of rotation. Every choreography has a sequence that is based on amount of rotations. So if you have, let's say, 3 spots in the room, so you have, in my case, my right, which if you're mirroring, it will be your left. So we have one corner, second corner, and obviously straight ahead. So you should be able to quickly change from one side to another. So for example, in my case, I'm gonna do left, right, straight ahead, right, left, straight ahead. So with that being said, I always know where I'm going, and that's where everything starts. Now, it's important to understand the amount of degree of the rotation that you'll be doing. So if you're having a 360, for example, let's just say you have spotted, in my case, again, I'm spotting to my left, then by the end of my turn, I still want to make sure that I look to the left. Obviously, if it's right, repeating the exercise. So always, always, always when you're turning, make sure that A, you keep your eye level relatively up. B, don't drop your head. And if you hear that your teacher is asking you to bring your head up, make sure that you don't compress the spine. And the last thing is very careful with the interaction of neck, upper body. You want to make sure that you're not creating any sort of shapes that are not needed. And always practice your spot. It's just a great great thing to improve. So make sure that you can quickly switch from right to left, right, left, straight, and so forth. Now the second thing that we have to talk about is our torso and shoulders. So when we're dancing, the rule of thumb is that we don't turn the torso and shoulders with the head at the same time. So if I do so, I will be very slow. So every time everything moves, there's no opposition. There's no torque being created by moving different parts of the body. So with that being said, if I'm trying to have a crisp and sharp turn, it's not going to happen. The rule of thumb is that every time you move either the head, either the shoulders and torso, if I turn around, you should be able to see that moving everything does not create a contrast. With that being said, there is no time changes. Now, if I move just the torso or just the head, that will add speed. If I try to be very fast with the torso and head, I can't. This is literally as fast as I can go. So a great exercise for you would be maybe placing the hands in between, just like this, and learning how to separate the head only, the torso. Another thing that you can definitely work on is the range of motion. So if you open your hands, here's my right hand. I'm going to try to reach to the right, rotating all the way without using the head. Keeping the hands in an equal distance from each other. And once again, this time going to my left, constantly spotting, in this case, at the camera. I can also open the hands and simply move the head all the way to the right and all the way to the left. Just make sure that you don't do everything at the same time. So just get used to the separation of the body. Next in line, obviously, our knees and our feet. So when we're rotating, the knees and the feet, as well as the hip flexors, have the power to stop us as well as to give us momentum. The way that we use it will determine our balance and stability from foot to foot. So for example, let's just say that we do this. So we're going to have a knee, 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 knee. One of the things that you should almost immediately feel is that essentially every time you drop your knee, you soften the knee, your hip flexors start projecting, right, quite the opposite side. So for example, if I soften the left knee of mine, the right hip flexor will start pushing right back. And obviously, if I project forward with the right side, the left hip flexor will essentially start producing power back. So that's called opposition, and that's one of the things that we're trying to understand and achieve better when dancing. Now, if you're trying to turn to your right, the hip flexor and the knee that you need to focus on is essentially the left side of yours. So if I'm trying to turn to the right, I'm going to think of left hip flexor. So you see how I'm projecting back first, and then I push the hip flexor all the way to essentially rotate to my right side. If I'll be turning to the left, obviously it works the opposite way. So the right hip flexor will project back, and obviously it will close right in the end. I'll do it again from a different angle. So the left foot, I'm on the left foot, but the right hip flexor is the one that is closing, turning me to my left. And if I'm on the right, essentially the left hip flexor is pushed back and boom, right? So when you're standing over, let's just say left or right foot, make sure the knee as itself is straight, okay? So if you're doing a spiral turn and you're on the right foot, you'll obviously be turning to the left. So you'll be turning to the left. If you're on the left foot and you're trying to create a spiral turn, you will be turning to your right and going back to the hip flexors and the knees. So if you're dancing international Latin, obviously the straight knee is kind of required here, right? It's a must. So what you want to do is, riding on the left foot, for example, for a spiral turn, use your right hip flexor push right behind you. So then you're projecting the rotation going to the right thanks to standing foot left, pivoting underneath, and of course the right hip flexor pushing all the way back to turn you. And then if you're on the right foot, you'll be turning to your left. Right, left hip flexor push back, and obviously turning all the way to the left. So this is in terms of hip flexors, and of course your knee and feet aligned. Your feet are naturally turned out throughout if you're dancing rhythm and Latin. And then of course your knees, if you're dancing American rhythm, for example, and if you're commencing an action, you may or may not choose to drop. That's a little more up to the type of movement that you're trying to create. And then if you're dancing international Latin, there is no particular reason for you to drop and to soften. Now the amount of rotation is also extremely important. So if you're dancing a spiral turn, for example, you don't want to start with hips being square. You also don't want to end up with hips being square, right? So the amount of rotation will be important. If I face you, and I'm going to position myself over the right foot of mine, as you can see, there's almost, if you wish, a three-dimensional look of the movement. So my left side is kind of pushed back. There's no reason for me to have hips square. So the left side is pushed back. What I'm going to do is, of course, I'll be turning to my left. I'm already fully on my right foot. So I'm going to push, push, push through the left hip flexor, and I'll turn approximately 90 degrees. Obviously, some of the previous videos we have discussed, we can definitely rotate more or less, depends on the movement we're trying to create or direction we try to face. But bottom line is, you want to make sure that when you're ending, you're not ending square, but instead you keep the right hip flexor pushed back if you'll be turning to your left. Now a very good exercise for you will be simply pivoting from one foot to another, just to get used with essentially the push-pull. So if you're on the right foot, you'll have to be turning to the right if you're doing a pivoting action, okay? So the left hip flexor behind you, close and turn. If you're on the left foot, same action applies. Right hip flexor push back. What you're gonna do is you'll be turning to the left since we're doing a pivot action. So you simply push with the hip to close it. Once you close it, you alter the hips. So if the hip flexor is behind you, the right one, and if you be turning to the left, by the time you turn, one of the things that you'll notice is how the left side actually goes all the way back, and it's essentially the right knee that it's now leading. In order for you to switch, you already have the left hip flexor pushed back. Just switch that hip flexor. And as you can see now, my right hip flexor is pushed back, and so forth. So understanding of the difference between a torso or shoulders movement, head position, and essentially the head movement being spotting, or, you know, it depends what the goal is. And of course, separating those from hip flexor, knees, and of course feet is important. Your head, your hip flexors and knee usually can work together as a one. And then the torso is the one that we kind of try to isolate. So we can lead with one or another, depends on what we're trying to create. The next thing that you guys should practice is understanding of your hands. So essentially when you're turning, one of the things you don't want to happen is your hand to pull you. Typically when we're rotating, we keep our hands around our body, so relatively close. If I'm rotating to the right, what I don't want to do is my hand to pull me, obviously, off my center. So if I'll be turning to the right, I'll definitely go a bit more compact with my hands. Turning to the left works just about the same way. Now, besides the hands, I want to give you an exercise for essentially a weight change with about a quarter of a turn. Understanding if the hip, foot, or head is essentially the leading portion of the turn. So when I'm stepping forward on my right foot, unless I have a spiral rotation going to my left, that means that I'll be turning to the right as a pivoting action. When you're taking a forward step you have to decide which particular direction you will be going to, left or right, based on your choreography. And definitely ask your teacher which part of the body leads first. So if you would like to do a head, for example, you can do a head and then rotation. If you would like to do foot and hip, that means when you're taking a step forward, fully arrive on the foot, feel the inside part of it, the ball of the foot, delay the head, rotate, and then obviously add the head. If you're going to the left, works about the same. So essentially you can take a step, you still have to push towards the left foot, arriving in the ball of the foot. You can choose to do a head and body, or what you can do, of course, is fully arriving, delaying the head, rotating, and then of course snapping the head after. Now, a good exercise for it will be a constant quarter of a turn going right and left. So for example, you can fully arrive on the right foot, and again, you can choose which part of the body leads first, and then go. From here, you will create the next step, which of course has to be with the left foot, and you can do a different type of turn. As you can see, I'm turning approximately quarter of a turn every time I do so. One, and so forth. Arriving on your foot is a must, regardless what part of the body you choose to do so rotational in the first place. The biggest choice, in my opinion, would be what you do with the head. Are you spotting, or are you turning the head before rotating? Both are correct. For example, if you were to do a New York, you would not delay the head and pull the head after. You actually do a head to striking the foot. If you were to do a spiral turn, however, quite often you may delay before you move the head. Okay? And ideally, one would work the opposition of the other. In terms of looking for sharpness and crispness, you want to make sure that's happening. Otherwise, it will be a monotone turn and right, versus, for example, delaying the head and then snapping it, right? Guys, last but not least, make sure that you work on the balancing of the end of the turns of yours. So essentially, when you're stopping, you want to make sure that you have enough foot pressure. The center is involved of every turn of yours, so make sure it's constantly engaged and elevated in order for you to turn. Don't forget that although you have a standing foot that you have all the weight on, the supportive one is equally important. So with that being said, if you're turning, let's just say, as a spiral rotation, you have weight likely on the front foot. That means that the back foot of yours is equally connected. If you have a pivot action, for example, to the right, that means that the left foot becomes your supportive foot. You still need to contract and essentially push down in order for you to stabilize yourself. The hip flexor should not be allowed to fly around, so you want to make sure that you stop them as well. Keep your head up and be clear with what part of the body goes first. That's all from me. I hope that you'll find the video helpful. If you do so, hit the thumbs up, like the video, and subscribe, share with your friends. I'll see you in the next video.